Ed O'Keefe is a CBS News political contributor and a Washington Post congressional reporter, and he joins us now. Ed, the email chain says in part Russia and its government supports Mr. Trump. What does that tell us in the context of what we already know or think we know about Russia's meddling in the 2016 election?
It tells us this is very quickly going to become evidence in those ongoing investigations led by Special Counsel Robert Mueller and, of course, all the congressional committees up here that are investigating. Very quickly, members of both parties have signaled that this is a big turning point, some suggesting this is the most concrete evidence to date that Trump officials sought out cooperation with the Russian government, or Russian government officials sought out the Trump campaign to discredit Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump Jr. has made clear that nothing came of it, that there was no information shared. Regardless, the fact that this paper trail shows now that there were interactions and that there were high-ranking Russian officials seeking out the campaign to talk about this is evidence enough that there's now could be perhaps the best evidence yet of so-called collusion, or at least attempts to collude. I think it was John Dickerson who said earlier today, you know, he was clearly curious in colluding.
Collusion,
if he didn't outright
curious, a memorable phrase.
Yeah, that's what it was, and he certainly seemed that way if you read these emails. And by releasing all of them, yes, he's being transparent, and we thank him for that. But it's definitely showing us even more how curious he was and how willing he was to rope in the most senior members of the campaign. Let me just read you one statement that came in a little while ago here, Tony, from Ron Wyden, one of the top Democrats on the Senate Intelligence Committee, to sort of give you a sense of the reaction up here. He says, in part, these emails show there is no longer a question of whether this campaign sought to collude with a hostile foreign power to subvert America's democracy. The question is how far the coordination goes. It is now up to elected officials of both parties to stand up and do their duty, protect and defend the Constitution. That's the kind of rhetoric we're hearing up here. Others, including Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, who of course was Hillary Clinton's running mate, has suggested that this may now go beyond collusion into potential treason, if in fact this is indication of other attempts by the Russians to meet with the Trump campaign and discredit or disrupt last year's election.
Now, this revelation does not come on its own. It's the end of a long chain of events, and Trump Jr. has previously slammed accusations of Russian meddling as lies, as disgusting, as phony. What light does this revelation shed on these previous statements, other than revealing them to be false, it would seem? And what hope is there for Trump Jr. to get out from under this latest avalanche of, I don't know, this political dark cloud, let's call it?
Sure. Well, he's lawyered up. We know he's hired a criminal defense attorney in New York to work with him on this. He has offered to meet with the congressional committees to discuss this further. And by releasing the emails, frankly, he puts all the evidence, or at least some of the evidence, out there for the public to review and for us to realize now that this may be the closest evidence yet linking the Russians to the campaign. So he now becomes a central character in this. Note that he forwarded the emails to Jared Kushner, his brother-in-law, and Paul Manafort, the former campaign manager, both of them obviously still the subjects of the ongoing investigations as well, and this will only increase the interest in their involvement. And also notable this afternoon, Tony, we've seen the vice president, through his spokesperson, distance himself from all of this, saying he had no involvement in it. Remember, he was not yet part of the campaign and therefore knew nothing about it, doesn't comment on it, doesn't want to get involved. And that is by design. At this point, you have to start insulating the vice president from some of this. He remains up here at the Capitol today talking to Republicans about the health care plan. He's already ignored questions that myself and others shouted at him about this and about the ongoing health care talks. But now Don Jr. becomes a more central figure in this ongoing scandal, even as others like the vice president try to distance himself a little bit from the drama.
You've covered scandals before. This one's obviously different, and yet all scandals on some level are the same. Do you think this revelation is a turning point where we're going to see supporters of the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency shift their positioning ever so slightly?
Potentially, yeah. I think we haven't had a good enough opportunity to do some of that yet. Obviously, you saw sort of in the Twitter sphere or in the public space, Trump supporters at large defend the president's son and the president himself and sort of once again throw accusations at Democrats and the news media for continuing to look into this. But this now absolutely is a big turning point because it provides some of that long expected evidence that there may have been closer coordination between Russian officials and the campaign. And even if it didn't lead to anything, even if it's not illegal, it is, or ultimately found to be criminal, it is evidence that there were attempts made now, and that can no longer be disputed based on the emails that the Times reviewed and that Donald Trump Jr. released today.
And my final question really maybe should have been my first question, which is the president himself, pretty quiet on the subject so far. What does that signal?
Well, remember, through the weekend, folks commenting on this on his behalf have pointed out he knew nothing about this meeting, he wasn't in the meeting, and wasn't involved in arranging it. Obviously, it's with former business associates of his, and it happened in his home at Trump Tower there. It happened one floor down from his offices last year. But there was no direct involvement, they say, by the president, who has been relatively quiet on this subject, tweeting about other things, about the possibility of Los Angeles getting the Olympics in 2028, about Senate Democrats, in his view, holding up the nomination of cabinet appointments. But beyond that, so far at least, the president has been pretty quiet about it.
I imagine that quiet will only hold for so long. Ed O'Keefe, a political contributor to CBS News and congressional correspondent for the Washington Post. Ed, thank you very much.
Good to see you, Tony. Take care.
Good to see you.